Hello, my name is Amadeus Malonje, and I'm an international relations student in the final year at Africa University. And I'm here together with.
Hi guys, my name is Ike. I'm a final year student from Africa University studying international relations as well.
Hi, my name is Victoria. I'm also an international relations student doing my fourth year at Africa University.
Hi guys, I'm Rosedin. I am an international relations student at Africa University.
Hi guys, my name is Olive. I'm also an international student, a final year.
And today we'll be discussing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which were set up in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly, which are basically like a blueprint for like every single United Nations member that they're obliged by. And they're to be completed by 2030. Well, we're in 2022 now, so how's it looking?
Right, seeing that we're now in 2022 and we have just about 8 years left until we have to see the actualization of these SDGs, one thing that I would like to comment on is the idea of gender equality. It's there listed as one of the SDGs, and the question is, how far have we gone in terms of gender equality? And I wouldn't say, too far. However, there are certain steps that are being made. For example, this morning I saw on the news that with the World Cup, Iran has been almost sidelined, and the World Cup officials are being advised to ban Iran from participating in the World Cup, primarily because of female rights violations that are taking place in the country. So Iran faces the risk of not participating in the World Cup later on this year, just because there is no gender equality being practiced in the country. Yeah.
Okay, on to you.
I actually beg to differ because countries like Rwanda, they've actually, pursued the gender equality thing, because you can see that there are more women within their parliaments. Even within Zimbabwe, we have like more women parliamentarians. So this shows that even though it's a bit shaky, but we're still going towards the sustainable goal of gender equality. So that's my contribution.
Well, I would like to highlight the fact that despite the the adoption of these SDGs, Africa is still lagging behind in terms of socio-economic development. We still have, there's been a minimum progress in terms of eradicating poverty. We still have a lot of cases whereby people suffering from that, and there is still food insecurity. For an example, a child born in Africa today is still at the risk of receiving high quality education. So when we're talking about having quality education, that is still lagging behind. We still don't have quality education. Even when you try to think of the future for future generations, we still haven't tried to put that in order. And also, for an example, an African child in school today continues to struggle to read and write due to poor quality of education services. Still on quality education, we still don't have poor quality services in terms of education. And also, if we look at one of the goals, that is the health one, what does it say? Having good health.
And well-being.
Yes, good health and well-being. Many Africans continue to visit they still cannot visit the hospital because of poverty. They do not have money to do so. So I can say that as much as this has been tried to be implemented, we are still lagging behind in a lot of things: poverty, food, education, even gender issues, like what Ike was explaining. But however, I would like to highlight the fact that in terms of industry innovation and infrastructure, African countries have really tried to prioritize that sector, because they believe that once they improve the infrastructure, then they're probably going to pave way for development. They have tried doing this And some African countries have actually resorted to borrowing money from countries like China. And well, it is a good thing. China is helping us, giving us money, and we're trying to develop our infrastructure. But at the same time, it worsens the burden, because already we have debts from China. So yes, we are trying to achieve that goal of innovation and infrastructure, but at the same time, it also comes along with problems such as debts. Yeah.
Well, Olive, what can you say about the way DRC has been implementing the Sustainable Development Goals?
What I'm going to talk first is DRC is not a development country, because people think like because it's the biggest country, it's rich, but it's not developing. And the United Nations bring us like some development in different way. And the first way is in education, because DRC is part of United Nations since 1960. And the first one is education. So United Nations ensure equal access to quality education for all and promote lifelong learning opportunities. And the second one is also about good health. Why? We have different type of disease in DRC. I don't know if you guys hear about cholera, something like this. And we have also Ebola. Do you know it? And
so one of the SDG goals is to implement peace, justice, and having strong institutions. And in the millennial era, Africa has shown elements proving otherwise. We have had elements of conflicts, corruption, and how do these hinder development in a country?
Okay, so the attributes of corruption and unstable governments, they actually add to the difficulty in attaining the non-sustainable development goals, because you can look at countries like Zimbabwe, whereby we were ruled by like thieves, for lack of a better word. So you'd see that instead of the funds to go into developing the country, like infrastructural development, building of roads, improving the education sector, rather it was, pulled towards the luxuries and like cars, houses, which were doing nothing to help the countries grow. However, there are other countries which have actually attained the sustainable development goals, such as Botswana, which has strong institutions which are fighting against corruption, such that the level of corruption in Botswana is reduced, resulting in it actually developing. Even in cases of countries like Mauritius, they've also eradicated corruption in favor of development. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Okay, so how far do you guys think we've been set back by COVID and the Russia-Ukraine crisis? Because there's been huge repercussions to the global economy. So how far have we been set back, Africa?
Well, I think that looking at the Russian-Ukraine crisis, since it was given sanctions, and looking at the financial sector, as in our financial sector, you'd find out that we can't, what can I say, we don't have any financial interactions with people in the Poland, Russia anymore, because of the sanctions that were put on Russia. And I think that's what I have to say.
I would also like to add that on the, in regards to zero hunger, the SDG of zero hunger is very difficult now to attain, specifically in Eastern Europe because of the Russo-Ukrainian war. Why I say this is because, as we understand, Ukraine supplied majority of Europe, is it, with wheat? So now because that war is taking place, naturally, when in the face of war, something has to give. So the production of wheat is obviously not going to be as high as it was prior to the war breaking out. And it's the same thing with, for example, affordable energy. Despite the Russo-Ukrainian war, Russia is still supplying, the European economy with energy and all that stuff, but at what cost?
So what do you guys think about like just the concept of the sustainable development goals? Do you think it's realistic? Because like each and every target has like they have like mini targets for like each and every goal. So in total there's like 169 targets, and there's people who say that's too ambitious.
I think it is a bit too ambitious. Having, like what you're saying, 169 different goals that go in various different directions and different sectors within the next, it was supposed to be, within the next 8 years, a very idealistic approach, right? But in the realistic sense, it's impossible. Why? Because the idea of that doesn't take into cognizance the possible realities of war, for example. Doesn't take into cognizance issues such as outbreaks of various diseases like COVID-19. COVID-19 drastically impacted the attainment of these SDGs. So I think it's a really unrealistic, it's an idealistic approach. It works perfectly in a utopia, but as the world is, we are in a constant state of nature, which is a dystopian state of nature. Nothing really works the way that it's supposed to work. And, all kudos goes to the United Nations for trying to put it on paper and say this is what we need to attain. But realistically, it's not going to work. One other reason why it's not going to work is because the impeding forces towards these SDGs are things that sometimes we cannot control, or things that are so embedded within societies or communities that it's very hard to weed them out. For example, issues to do with the gender equality thing. Various cultures around the world, it is cultural practice for there to be gender inequality. So now for them to go, for the world as a conglomerate, or as a collective, to go into each community and weed out aspects of gender inequality, that's impossible. It's really impossible. So for example, gender equality, it will never be there. Unless, of course, there's certain institutions that are strong and put in place and all that can start to work on it. So, yeah.
I personally think that the Sustainable Development Goals, they are not attainable because they're like Eurocentric in a way. They are ignoring the aspect that Africa, we had the whole slave trade thing, then the colonization thing. So countries like the USA, they've already developed and they're able to attain these goals like, poverty reduction, zero hunger, and all that, right? But in Africa, we're still developing. And like Ike said, we're still there are aspects of gender inequality within culture. So we need to develop in order for us to be able to weed out those things. And these SDGs, they're just basically Eurocentric and not exactly realistic when it comes to applying them within the African context, because these are totally different spheres of development. So in order for these goals to actually, have a future, they have to be grounded in reality, which is that Africa is underdeveloped. They should give us a chance to develop first, then we'll look at these SDGs, because some of them, they're just aimed at developing countries and they're just being imposed on us for who knows what reason. So, yeah.
And I'd also like to add, one of the SDGs is effective climate action or something like that. How is climate action meant to be made a priority in an environment where us as Africans, we are bearing the brunt of industrialization processes and whatnot that's taking place outside the African continent, right? Our African issues are things like deforestation and whatnot. Those are the African climate issues. But because, actions taking place around the world, we're dealing with the transgressions of the various countries outside of Africa. And yet climate action is something we are supposed to take heed of. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense. It's kind of like taking Panadol for someone else's headache, if what I'm saying you get what I mean. So I think things like climate change, these are things that climate action rather, yes, as Africans we need to do better things, stop cutting down all the trees, etc. But I feel like there's, apart from amongst those 169 you said, 169, there's some things that really should not be something that's made African for the Africans to do. Like what Victoria is saying, these are all Eurocentric ideals and ideas. I feel like they copy pasted what was meant to be done in Europe and made it what's meant to be done in Africa. That's my point.
Actually, to talk about the whole climate thing, like a lot of like the big economies we have, like America or China, these are economies that were like that developed through like very industrialized processes with like fossil fuels and everything. But then now we're at a place where we have to focus on climate change and climate action, and then focus on economic growth. But then there's talks about how those two don't really go well together.
They don't.
Exactly. It's like what Vicky was saying, that the United States, for example, developed over a period of 200 years plus, right? And like what you're saying, that development took place thanks to destroying the environment. Now we are expected to develop but not destroy the environment.
They're paying for a crime you didn't commit.
Exactly. So, hey.
Well, I think that if Africa really, well, speaking of Africa specifically, if it really wanted to achieve these SDG goals, it should really make an effort to identify the elements that are really that would potentially stop the continent from achieving these goals, such as having corrupt governments, underdevelopment, just doing all these illegitimate things, and basically all of the elements that would say are really pushing Africa away, pushing Africa backward in terms of development. And once it is realized that, then maybe we can actually strive for achieving those goals. Because you'd notice that one of the basic things that's mostly talked about amongst the SDG goals is poverty. But are we really looking at the elements that are driving us into poverty? Are we really trying to eradicate those elements? If we look at education, to some extent, Africa is really doing well, but is it sustainable? Is it going to be beneficial for the next generation and the other generation to come, and so forth and so forth? If we look at health, Africa is poorly doing this. There's a lot of people who cannot afford to go to the hospital. A lot of people die without even thinking of going to the hospital, while we go back to poverty again. So are these elements being identified, or the question becomes, are we actually able to identify those problems, or is it a point that we cannot do away with it? Because you'd notice that most African countries cannot do away with corruption. And if you look at corruption leads to so many things.
Okay, so let's just cut out all the goals, and then, what exactly is your top priority? Like, what goal would you want to, do you think is the most important to be achieved by the African countries?
I think the most important goal is gender equality for me, per se, because, well, despite the fact that culture has tendencies to shift towards gender inequality, I believe that us as women, as girls, we have so much to offer the economy, because you can see that the informal economy is basically it's dominated by us women. So if we're to be included more within the economy, that would mean more revenue for the government. It would also mean more human capital.
But does that mean that if we have girls and women in participating in all of that, what makes you think that they can perform differently from what people who already the men are doing?
The point isn't on performing differently. It's improving efficiency. Because if we're both involved in it, that would be more gender sensitive policies. That means there's more manpower, there's more human capital, there's more government revenue, and that will actually boost the development of any country in particular which decides to take on the gender equality sustainable development goal.
Okay.
I think the most one that should be the priority, specifically for the African context, after all these SDGs are for Africa, would definitely have to be peace and security. The idea of peace and security. I think Africa, the livelihood of Africans has been affected drastically by the lack of peace and security in whichever region it is that you look at. For example, in Southern Africa, we've got Mozambique and South Africa, where the peace and security aspect is very much, can I say, in a quagmire. The same thing is going on in West Africa. Nigeria is the biggest case study that I can give. And then in East Africa, we have the constant, or let me not say constant, but the random, sporadic bombings that happen in Kenya and whatnot, as well as Somalia and South Sudan and all that. So we have peace and security, as well as the eradication of poverty. Those two things, I believe, are the most important. They're the ones that should be the priority, because those are the issues that, without dealing with those, you can't deal with anything else.
Yeah, and mine would be poverty, eradicating poverty in all forms. I like the point that says all forms and every way, because I believe that hunger comes from poverty. Not having good health, like health securities, health issues, it all comes from poverty.
Okay, so let's say you guys are like the head of states of your nations and you've been invited to a UN meeting or whatever. So what exactly do you say about like sustainable development goals? Anything, or what you can recommend to make it better, or what would be your commentary on sustainable development goals if you're at a UN meeting?
I would start by saying that we need to define development within the African context. What is development for us as Africans? What is development for African countries and African governments and African societies? Because I feel like the idea of development is too, as Vicky said, too Eurocentric. The idea of development is it's painted in the European or American or whatever color, and that doesn't work. It's much like the idea of democracy, the question of democracy. What type of democracy works and what type of development works? I feel like as heads of state and leaders and whatnot, we should be able to define what development means for Africa. And I would start by saying development in Africa is not the same as, for example, development in Australia, right? Development in Africa would mean less war, right? That is a form of development, because we're migrating from one situation to a better situation. So that's a form of development. That's what I'd say about that.
If we're able to identify our own type of development, and if we're able to identify the elements that are hindering development to take place, and that would be the point.
Vicky, on the sustainable development report, like they have like a whole report for like each and every country and how they're doing on the progress. It says Zimbabwe is moderately improving on gender equality. What are your thoughts on that?
I think then that means that the country is in the right track in terms of attaining development and sustainable goals, because I think Rwanda is also on the road to gender equality as well, and its economy has been improving like a lot. So I think it's only a matter of time before Zimbabwe also develops, and maybe, who knows, it might actually reach Rwanda's, where Rwanda is, or even surpass it if it keeps on making strides towards the SDGs.
Definitely. And it says you guys are stagnating on zero hunger. And what can you say about that?
Stagnating. That entails that there's absolutely no development that's taking place. We're at the same. I mean, look, we're talking about Zimbabwe here. Right? Zimbabwe used to be the breadbasket of Southern Africa. So, various things that we all know about took place, and that title has now been kind of revoked from the Zimbabwean description. Yeah. So, the idea of stagnation is actually not very far, and we know that we're stagnant, but at least we're still able to produce our crops. We're still able to take care of the citizens of Zimbabwe relatively well. Yes, there's hunger, but that it's not getting any better. It's not like, you know, everybody can now afford, like, you know, 3 really, really full and balanced meals. I mean, yeah, there's a very, very stark difference between those who can and those who cannot.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not shifting. It's not going lower. It's not going higher. It's the same.
All right. Okay. So basically, do you guys all agree that the Sustainable Development Goals need to be revised?
Yep.
Yeah.
I do not think so. It's just a matter of I'll repeat the points again, highlighting the elements that we need to look at when trying to achieve these goals. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that. These are the opinions of my fellow students. And yes, thank you for joining me and providing your commentary on the whole issue. And if there's anyone watching this, you can totally provide your own commentary in the comments below. So yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you.